The room was full of laughter when my entire life quietly collapsed. My father stood at the center of the banquet hall, smiling the kind of smile men wear when they believe they finally made it. Retirement balloons floated near the ceiling. His old colleagues raised glasses. My mother stood beside him, hand on his arm, nodding proudly as people congratulated them for decades of hard work. And then my grandmother cleared her throat. She wasn't supposed to speak. She wasn't on the program. She wasn't even standing close to the microphone. But she leaned forward anyway, her voice thin, sharp, impossible to ignore. "And of course," she said, smiling sweetly, "we should thank her, too, for paying the property taxes all these years. Without her, this house wouldn't even exist." Silence. Not the polite kind, not the awkward kind, the kind that feels like oxygen has been sucked out of the room. Every head turned, every smile froze, every glass stopped midair. And my parents, they didn't laugh, they didn't explain, they didn't even look at me. They went completely silent. That was the moment I realized I wasn't just a guest at my father's retirement party. I was the secret. Welcome to my YouTube channel. This is my story of betrayal, and if you've ever trusted the wrong person, hit that subscribe button because you are not alone. Here is how it happened. I didn't always know I was paying for something that wasn't mine. For most of my life, I believed what children are taught to believe, that parents protect you, that family doesn't lie to you, that sacrifices are mutual. I was wrong. I was reading comments on my YouTube videos the other day, and I realized I wasn't the only one. Story after story poured in, people discovering, years too late, that the people they trusted most had quietly used them. Not violently, not obviously, but legally, politely, with smiles. Back then, I didn't think my story would ever be one of those comments because my parents didn't look like villains. They looked proud. They looked tired. They looked like people who had struggled and deserved peace. That's how it starts. The house was always described as the family home, not my parents' house, not my grandmother's house, not anyone's house in particular, just the family home. It was the place where birthdays happened, where arguments echoed through walls and disappeared by morning, where I grew up believing stability was permanent. When I got my first real job, my parents sat me down at the kitchen table. Same table I'd done homework on, same table where my mother used to slice apples for me after school. My father spoke carefully, like he'd practiced. "Things are expensive now," he said. "Property tax went up again. We're all pitching in." We're all pitching in. That sentence mattered, because I didn't question it. Why would I? I lived there. I had a room. I ate dinner there. I was told it was our home. So I transferred the money. Every year. Sometimes late, sometimes stressed, sometimes choosing taxes over vacations, over savings, over myself. But I told myself it was normal. Families help each other. The payments became routine, automatic, invisible. And that's the danger when something unfair becomes familiar. I never saw the paperwork, never asked whose name was on what, never thought to, because every time I hinted at moving out, my mother's face changed. "You don't need to rush," she'd say softly. "This is your home, too." Your home, too. Those words are powerful when you want to belong. Fast forward to the retirement party. The speeches were long, the applause was loud, the pride was thick in the air. People talked about my father's integrity, his discipline, his honesty. I watched him nod humbly, as if those words were facts carved in stone. And then my grandmother spoke. She wasn't malicious. That's the part that still messes with me. She wasn't angry. She wasn't exposing anyone on purpose. She was proud. proud that I had stepped up, proud that I had helped keep things running. She thought everyone already knew. When she said property tax payments, something inside me dropped, because suddenly the room felt wrong. The smiles didn't return, the applause didn't resume. My mother stared straight ahead, my father swallowed hard. Someone coughed, someone laughed nervously, and I stood there, heat rushing to my face, realizing I had just learned something in public that no one had ever explained to me in private. After the party, I waited. I expected clarification, a joke, an explanation, anything. Instead, my parents avoided me. They thanked guests, they hugged relatives, they packed leftover food. They acted like nothing had happened, like my grandmother hadn't detonated a truth bomb in the middle of their celebration. When I finally asked, quietly, what did she mean? My father said, "We'll talk later." We never talk later unless it's something they don't want to say. That night, I lay awake replaying the moment. The silence, the way no one contradicted her, the way no one said, "Oh no, she misspoke," because she hadn't. She'd spoken too honestly. And for the first time in my life, I wondered, what exactly have I been paying for, and why did everyone else already seem to know? I didn't confront them that night, but I made a decision. The next morning, I would look at the documents myself, and once I did, I would understand why silence was the only response they had left. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was angry, not yet. Not because I was heartbroken, not fully. It was something worse, confusion. The kind that creeps in quietly and rearranges everything you thought you understood. By morning, the house felt different. The walls looked the same, the furniture hadn't moved, but I walked through it like a stranger. My parents had already left for errands, or maybe they just didn't want to be there when I woke up. Either way, the silence felt intentional. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table. That table. And for the first time in my life, I noticed the filing cabinet in the corner. It had always been there. Brown, dented, boring, invisible, until it wasn't. I told myself I was just being responsible. That's how people justify crossing invisible lines. They call it responsibility. I pulled the drawer open. Inside were folders, old ones, thick ones, the kind you only keep when something matters enough not to throw away. Mortgage statements, utility bills, insurance policies. Then I saw it, a folder labeled with the house address. My hands actually hesitated because some part of me already knew if I opened it, things wouldn't go back to how they were. I opened it anyway. The first page was the deed. I remember staring at it, reading the words over and over like they might rearrange themselves if I waited long enough. They didn't. My name wasn't there. Not partially, not hidden, not misspelled. Nowhere. The house wasn't ours. It wasn't even theirs in the way I'd assumed. It was in my grandmother's name, only hers. I sat back in the chair, heart pounding, and suddenly every conversation from the last decade replayed itself differently. We're all pitching in. This is your home, too. You'll inherit it someday. Someday, a word that costs nothing to say. I kept digging. Tax records, payment confirmations, and then I found what broke me. Receipts. Year after year, payments made from my account, not contributions, not shared expenses, straight property tax payments, logged, documented, predictable. I wasn't helping, I was maintaining an asset I didn't own. I felt something rise in my chest, not rage yet, but betrayal's quieter cousin, disorientation. The kind where you ask yourself if you've misunderstood reality for years or if reality was carefully edited for you. I thought back to every time I delayed my own life, the apartment I didn't rent, the city I didn't move to, the savings account that never grew, all because the family needs this right now. When my parents came home, I didn't yell. That surprised even me. I just held the deed in my hands and asked calmly, "Why didn't you ever tell me the house isn't yours?" My mother froze, not confused, not surprised, prepared. My father sighed like someone who'd been waiting for this moment but hoped it would never come. "It's complicated," he said. "It always is when the truth has been stretched too far to explain simply." They sat down across from me, same seats, same table, different power dynamic. My mother spoke first. "You live here," she said gently. "You benefit from the house." Benefit, as if shelter were a privilege they granted me, not something I'd been paying for. My father added, "We never forced you, you agreed." That sentence landed harder than anything else, because it was technically true. They never forced me, they just never gave me enough information to say no. I asked the question that had been forming since the party. "Why didn't you tell me it was Grandma's house?" My mother looked away. My father answered, "She didn't want you to feel entitled." Entitled to a house I paid taxes on for years, to transparency, to the truth. That's when my grandmother's comment made sense. She thought I knew. She thought this was some noble arrangement, me helping preserve a property for the future. She had no idea I believed something entirely different, which meant only two people had full clarity, and they were sitting in front of me. I asked, "Where does the money go when Grandma's gone?" Silence. Longer this time. Then my father said carefully, "That will be decided later." Later again. Always later. I stood up. My hands were shaking now. "So let me get this straight. I've been paying property taxes on a house I don't own, with no guarantee I ever will, while you let me believe it was ours." My mother reached for my arm. I stepped back. That small movement said more than words ever could. She started crying. Not loud, not dramatic, controlled tears. The kind that say, "Please stop pushing. This story works better if you don't ask questions." My father rubbed his temples. "We did what we thought was best for everyone," he said. That sentence, "for everyone," felt like theft, because everyone hadn't agreed. That night, I locked my door, something I'd never done before, and for the first time, I asked myself a question I'd avoided my whole life. If they could hide this, what else had they hidden? The next day, I went to see my grandmother, not angry, curious. She was surprised to see me alone. We drank tea in her living room, surrounded by furniture older than me. I asked casually, "When you mentioned the property taxes at the party, what did you mean?" She smiled. "Oh, sweetheart, you've been such a blessing, paying all those taxes. Your parents told me you wanted to help secure the house." Secure it? For whom? I asked her directly, "Do you think the house will be mine someday?" She paused, just for a moment, then said, "Well, I assumed it would go to your parents first. That's only fair." Fair, another word that hides 1,000 assumptions. Something inside me went cold, because suddenly the full picture came into focus. My parents weren't planning badly. They were planning without me, using my money, my trust, my silence. I thanked my grandmother for the tea and left before she could ask why my smile looked wrong. On the walk home, I felt lighter and heavier at the same time. Lighter because I finally understood. Heavier because understanding meant responsibility, and responsibility meant a decision was coming. That night, I sat on my bed, opened my banking app, and hovered over the scheduled tax payment. The next one was due in 2 weeks. For the first time in years, I didn't feel obligation. I felt clarity. And clarity is dangerous because once you have it, you can't unsee what you've been funding. I didn't cancel the payment, not yet. Instead, I drafted a message, not emotional, not accusatory, just one sentence, a sentence that would change everything. I didn't send the message right away. I read it over and over, watching how each word felt in my chest. Not angry, not apologetic, just clear. Clarity is terrifying to people who survive on ambiguity. The message said, "I've reviewed the documents. I won't be making any more property tax payments until we discuss ownership and future plans in writing." That was it. No accusations, no threats, no emotions they could dismiss as overreacting. Just a boundary. I stared at the screen for a long time before pressing send. And the moment I did, something shifted in the house, even though no one had replied yet, like the air itself knew. The response came faster than I expected. Too fast. My mother. "Why are you doing this to us?" Not, "Why are you confused?" Not, "Let's talk." "Why are you doing this to us?" I didn't reply, because that question revealed more than any document ever could. That evening, my parents asked me to sit down. Again, same table, same chairs, but this time I noticed something I hadn't before. They were nervous, not guilty, nervous. There's a difference. Guilt comes from knowing you're wrong. Nervousness comes from knowing you're losing control. My father spoke first. "You're being drastic," he said. "This doesn't need to be legal." Legal. That word hadn't existed in our conversations before. It wasn't supposed to, because legality implies rights, and rights are dangerous when someone's been relying on your compliance. "I'm not trying to cause problems," I said. "I just need clarity." My mother leaned forward. "You have clarity," she said softly. "You live here. You're safe. Your family." Safe. As if safety was something they could revoke. As if I should be grateful enough not to ask questions. Then came the pivot, the one I hadn't expected, but should have. My father sighed and said, "Do you know how this looks, cutting support right after my retirement?" There it was, the timing, not the ethics, not the deception, the optics. I felt something settle inside me, a calm I'd never felt before, because suddenly everything made sense. The party, the silence, the avoidance. They weren't worried about me finding out. They were worried about when I found out. I asked, "Were you ever going to tell me?" My mother hesitated. That hesitation lasted maybe 2 seconds, but it told me everything. "Well," she said, choosing her words carefully, "we thought it would sort itself out over time." Sort itself out. Another phrase people use when they hope someone else will keep paying quietly until it's too late to change anything. I stood up. "I'm going to start looking for my own place." The reaction was immediate. My mother's face collapsed. My father's voice sharpened. "You can't just leave," he said. Can't. Not "please don't," not "let's talk." Can't. "Why not?" I asked. Because I already knew the answer. They just hadn't realized I'd see it too. My father said it without realizing how bad it sounded. Because the taxes. There it was. Not "we'll miss you," not "we love you." The taxes. I moved out 2 weeks later. Not dramatically, not overnight. I packed quietly. Each box felt like reclaiming a year of my life. My parents watched me like I was making a mistake, not like they were losing a child. And that hurt more than any argument could have. Living alone was terrifying and freeing. The silence in my new apartment was different. It didn't hide things. It didn't manipulate. It just existed. A month after I moved out, my grandmother called. Her voice sounded confused, upset. She said, "I got a notice from the city, something about unpaid property taxes." I closed my eyes. The consequences had arrived faster than expected. I went to see her. She showed me the letter, hands shaking. Late fees, penalties, deadlines. She looked at me like I'd abandoned her, and that look nearly broke me. She said, "I thought you were handling this." "I was," I replied, "but I didn't know it wasn't my responsibility." Her confusion turned into something sharper, not anger, realization. She called my parents while I sat there, put them on speaker. That conversation changed everything. My grandmother asked one question: "Why didn't you tell her the truth?" Silence. The same silence from the party. But this time it wasn't public, it was surgical. My father tried to explain. My mother cried. Excuses spilled out. But my grandmother wasn't listening anymore. She'd done the math, and she didn't like the answer. "I never agreed to this arrangement," she said. "You used her." Used. That word hung in the air. Heavy. Final. After the call ended, my grandmother looked at me differently. Not proudly, not kindly, regretfully. She said, "I assumed you knew. I'm so sorry." I nodded, because at that point, apologies didn't fix anything. They just confirmed damage. 2 days later, my parents showed up at my apartment, unannounced, desperate. They didn't sit, they didn't ask how I was. They went straight to the point. "We need help," my father said. Need. Not want, not hope. Need. They told me the penalties were stacking up, that Grandma was furious, that the family was in danger. Family. That word again, always when money's involved. I listened quietly. Then I said something that shocked even me. "I'll help under one condition." They leaned in, hope flickering. Desperation sharpens attention. "I want everything documented," I said. "Ownership terms, repayment, or reimbursement for what I've already paid." My mother gasped. My father's face hardened. "This is blackmail," he said. Blackmail? For asking fairness? I smiled sadly. "No," I said. "This is the first honest conversation we've had." They left without agreeing, but I knew something they didn't. They had deadlines. I had options. That night I received an email from a lawyer, sent accidentally, CC'd instead of BCC'd, a draft agreement discussing my past payments, referring to them as family contributions, strategizing how to frame them legally. I read it slowly, every word, and by the time I reached the end, I understood something chilling. They weren't just reacting, they were preparing. I read the email 3 times, not because it was complicated, because I needed to be absolutely sure I wasn't imagining it. The subject line was harmless, something vague about tax clarification. But the language inside was surgical, cold, professional. It talked about me the way companies talk about risk. Quote, "Past payments may be characterized as voluntary familial contributions." End quote. Voluntary, a word that only works if you pretend information asymmetry doesn't exist. Another line followed, quote, "Client concern, potential claim of reimbursement or implied ownership." End quote. Potential claim, implied ownership. They were already preparing to neutralize me. What shook me wasn't the legal strategy, it was the timeline. This wasn't written after our conversation. This had been drafted before they came to my apartment, before the tears, before the desperation, before the talk of family being in danger, which meant one thing. Their visit wasn't reconciliation. It was damage control. I forwarded the email to myself. Then I closed my laptop and sat very still. There's a moment when betrayal fully lands where your body reacts before your mind catches up. My hands were calm, my breathing steady, but inside, something detached. The part of me that had been trying to save them, that part quietly stepped aside. The next morning, I didn't confront them. I didn't call the lawyer. I did something much scarier. I made an appointment with my own. The attorney was younger than I expected, sharp, focused, efficient. I laid everything out, the payments, the assumptions, the silence, the email. She didn't interrupt. She didn't gasp. She didn't say, "I'm so sorry." She said something much worse. "This happens more often than you think." She explained concepts I'd never heard before: unjust enrichment, detrimental reliance, implied agreements, words that translate roughly to someone benefited from your money while letting you believe a story that kept you paying. She didn't promise anything, but she didn't dismiss me either, which was enough. When I left her office, I felt strange, not empowered, awake, like I'd been living underwater and finally reached air. I didn't tell my parents I'd spoken to a lawyer. Instead, I waited, because people reveal the most when they think they're still in control. 3 days later, my mother called. Her voice was different, measured, professional. She asked if we could clear the air. That phrase is never about air, it's about leverage. We met at a cafe, neutral territory. She arrived early, already seated, hands folded. She smiled like this was a business meeting, because it was. She opened with nostalgia, stories from my childhood, moments she knew still softened me. I let her talk. Then she shifted. "We've been thinking," she said, "and we believe you're misunderstanding the situation." Misunderstanding, the word people use when facts are inconvenient. She slid a printed document across the table, a proposal. They'd formalized it. Monthly reimbursement, maybe over time. No acknowledgement of past deception, no ownership, no interest. And the most important line, this agreement does not imply prior obligation. They wanted me to sign away the past in exchange for crumbs in the future. I didn't touch the paper. "I've already spoken to a lawyer," I said calmly. The color drained from her face. Just a little. Enough. Her voice sharpened. "You're making this adversarial." Adversarial, as if fairness were aggression, as if transparency were violence. I stood up. "I'll have my attorney contact yours." She reached across the table. "Please," she said, "don't do this." This. Not don't leave, not don't hurt us, don't escalate. I walked out, and for the first time, I didn't feel guilty. That night, my phone exploded. Calls, texts, voicemails from relatives, people who'd never asked how I was, suddenly concerned about family harmony. The story was spreading, but not the truth. A version, their version. I received messages like, "Your parents are devastated. You're being ungrateful. This isn't how family behaves." No one asked what I'd paid. No one asked what I'd been told, because the truth is uncomfortable, and comfort chooses sides quickly. Then my grandmother called again. Her voice was quieter this time. "Your parents are saying you're threatening them," she said. Threatening. Another word that twists reality. I told her everything, slowly, clearly, without emotion. When I finished, there was a long pause. Then she said something I hadn't expected. "They did something similar to your uncle." My stomach dropped. She explained, Years ago, different asset, different story, same pattern. Promises, silence, convenient forgetting. That's when it hit me. This wasn't a mistake, it was a method. 2 days later, my lawyer called. "She's responded," she said. I braced myself. "They're denying any obligation," she continued, "and they're suggesting your payments were rent equivalent." Rent? I laughed, out loud. Rent without a lease? Rent without disclosure? Rent without choice? My lawyer paused. "There's something else," she said. "They've requested a meeting, all parties present." All parties, including my grandmother. The meeting was scheduled for the next week at the lawyer's office. Neutral ground, high stakes. I barely slept the night before, not from fear, from anticipation. The conference room was cold, glass walls, long table. My parents sat together, their lawyer beside them. My grandmother sat alone. She looked smaller, older. I took my seat across from them. No hugging, no small talk. Their lawyer spoke first, outlined their position, calm, controlled, confident. When he finished, my lawyer responded, precise, sharp, relentless. Facts, numbers, timelines. I watched my parents' faces change. This wasn't the conversation they'd prepared for. Then my grandmother spoke. Her voice shook. "I didn't know," she said. Everyone went still. I didn't know she believed the house was hers. My mother closed her eyes. My father stared at the table. My grandmother continued. "I never agreed to let my son and daughter-in-law mislead you." The room felt heavier. Then she said the sentence that changed everything. "I'm updating my will." My parents snapped their heads up. "What?" my father said. "I'm updating my will," she said quietly. And suddenly the room was no longer controlled. It was volatile. My parents started talking over each other. Lawyers intervened. Voices rose. Plans unraveled. I sat there, silent, watching the structure they'd built on my compliance begin to crack. But I knew something they didn't. This wasn't over. Because when money, control, and inheritance collide, people show you who they really are next. The meeting didn't end cleanly. It fractured. Voices overlapped. Lawyers tried to regain control, but something fundamental had already broken. My grandmother's words were still hanging in the air. "I'm updating my will." That sentence doesn't just change plans, it changes loyalties. My father leaned forward, panic bleeding through his composure. "Mother, let's not make decisions in anger." Anger, as if this was emotional, not corrective. My grandmother straightened in her chair. "This isn't anger," she said. "This is clarity." That word again, clarity. It kept showing up like a reckoning. She looked at me, not apologetically, not defensively, but with something closer to grief. "I should have asked more questions," she said. "I should have spoken to you directly." My mother interrupted. "This is a family matter." My grandmother didn't even look at her. "No," she said. "This became a legal matter the moment money and silence replaced honesty." The room went still. Their lawyer attempted to steer the conversation back to procedure, estate planning, timing, jurisdiction, but the emotional shift had already happened. Inheritance had stopped being a future concept. It was now leverage. After the meeting, my parents didn't speak to me, not one word. They left together, fast, like people escaping a fire before anyone notices the smoke. My grandmother stayed behind. She asked my lawyer to step out. Then she asked me something I wasn't ready for. "Did you ever feel pressured?" The question hit harder than accusation ever could, because pressure isn't always loud. Sometimes it sounds like love. "Yes," I said quietly, but I didn't know it was pressure at the time. She nodded. "That's how it works," she said. "If you can see it while it's happening, it stops working." A week passed, then two. Silence from my parents. No messages, no calls. The family group chat went dead. Then slowly, deliberately, people started leaving it, one by one. I watched my name remain while theirs disappeared. It felt symbolic and intentional. The first official letter arrived on a Tuesday from my parents' lawyer. Formal, cold, polished. They were disputing reimbursement, denying implied agreement, asserting I'd lived rent-free. Rent-free, the phrase burned. My lawyer wasn't surprised. "They're posturing," she said, "but there's something else happening." She slid another document toward me, a property valuation request, filed by my grandmother. She wasn't just updating her will, she was reassessing the entire estate. That's when the pressure campaign began, not legally, socially. An aunt called, not to ask how I was, to warn me. "You're tearing the family apart," she said. A cousin messaged, "You could have handled this privately." Privately, as if secrecy were virtue, as if silence were kindness. Then came the message that finally cut through me, from my mother. Short, precise. "If you continue this, don't expect us at your wedding or in your future." There it was, the threat disguised as consequence. Love conditional. I didn't respond, but that night I cried, not because I missed them, because I finally understood something devastating. They didn't see me as their child first, they saw me as a resource. Another week passed, then two. Silence from my parents. No messages, no calls. The family group chat went dead. Then slowly, deliberately, people started leaving it, one by one. I watched my name remain while theirs disappeared. It felt symbolic and intentional. The first official letter arrived on a Tuesday from my parents' lawyer. Formal, cold, polished. They were disputing reimbursement, denying implied agreement, asserting I'd lived rent-free. Rent-free, the phrase burned. My lawyer wasn't surprised. "They're posturing," she said, "but there's something else happening." She slid another document toward me, a property valuation request, filed by my grandmother. She wasn't just updating her will, she was reassessing the entire estate. That's when the pressure campaign began, not legally, socially. An aunt called, not to ask how I was, to warn me. "You're tearing the family apart," she said. A cousin messaged, "You could have handled this privately." Privately, as if secrecy were virtue, as if silence were kindness. Then came the message that finally cut through me, from my mother. Short, precise. "If you continue this, don't expect us at your wedding or in your future." There it was, the threat disguised as consequence. Love conditional. I didn't respond, but that night I cried, not because I missed them, because I finally understood something devastating. They didn't see me as their child first, they saw me as a resource. Another week passed, then two. Silence from my parents. No messages, no calls. The family group chat went dead. Then slowly, deliberately, people started leaving it, one by one. I watched my name remain while theirs disappeared. It felt symbolic and intentional. The first official letter arrived on a Tuesday from my parents' lawyer. Formal, cold, polished. They were disputing reimbursement, denying implied agreement, asserting I'd lived rent-free. Rent-free, the phrase burned. My lawyer wasn't surprised. "They're posturing," she said, "but there's something else happening." She slid another document toward me, a property valuation request, filed by my grandmother. She wasn't just updating her will, she was reassessing the entire estate. That's when the pressure campaign began, not legally, socially. An aunt called, not to ask how I was, to warn me. "You're tearing the family apart," she said. A cousin messaged, "You could have handled this privately." Privately, as if secrecy were virtue, as if silence were kindness. Then came the message that finally cut through me, from my mother. Short, precise. "If you continue this, don't expect us at your wedding or in your future." There it was, the threat disguised as consequence. Love conditional. I didn't respond, but that night I cried, not because I missed them, because I finally understood something devastating. They didn't see me as their child first, they saw me as a resource. Another week passed, then two. Silence from my parents. No messages, no calls. The family group chat went dead. Then slowly, deliberately, people started leaving it, one by one. I watched my name remain while theirs disappeared. It felt symbolic and intentional. The first official letter arrived on a Tuesday from my parents' lawyer. Formal, cold, polished. They were disputing reimbursement, denying implied agreement, asserting I'd lived rent-free. Rent-free, the phrase burned. My lawyer wasn't surprised. "They're posturing," she said, "but there's something else happening." She slid another document toward me, a property valuation request filed by my grandmother. She wasn't just updating her will, she was reassessing the entire estate. That's when the pressure campaign began, not legally, socially. An aunt called, not to ask how I was, to warn me. "You're tearing the family apart," she said. A cousin messaged, "You could have handled this privately." Privately, as if secrecy were virtue, as if silence were kindness. Then came the message that finally cut through me, from my mother. Short, precise. "If you continue this, don't expect us at your wedding or in your future." There it was, the threat disguised as consequence. Love conditional. I didn't respond, but that night I cried, not because I missed them, because I finally understood something devastating. They didn't see me as their child first, they saw me as a resource. Another week passed, then two. Silence from my parents. No messages, no calls. The family group chat went dead. Then slowly, deliberately, people started leaving it, one by one. I watched my name remain while theirs disappeared. It felt symbolic and intentional. The first official letter arrived on a Tuesday from my parents' lawyer. Formal, cold, polished. They were disputing reimbursement, denying implied agreement, asserting I'd lived rent-free. Rent-free, the phrase burned. My lawyer wasn't surprised. "They're posturing," she said, "but there's something else happening." She slid another document toward me, a property valuation request, filed by my grandmother. She wasn't just updating her will, she was reassessing the entire estate. That's when the pressure campaign began, not legally, socially. An aunt called, not to ask how I was, to warn me. "You're tearing the family apart," she said. A cousin messaged, "You could have handled this privately." Privately, as if secrecy were virtue. I didn't reply right away, not because I was afraid, but because I understood something instinctively. When someone says, "We need to talk tonight," they're not inviting discussion, they're announcing pressure. I agreed to meet them in public, a quiet restaurant, neutral ground, witnesses. They didn't like that, but they came anyway, together. Always together. My father looked older, not tired, diminished. My mother's face was composed, but her hands trembled as she folded her napkin. No one ordered food. That alone told me everything. My father spoke first. "We don't want lawyers anymore," he said. "Of course not. Lawyers disrupt narratives." "This has gone too far," my mother added. "Your grandmother is stressed, sick." Sick. The word was dropped carefully, strategically, like bait. I asked calmly, "Is she actually sick?" They exchanged a look. Too fast, too rehearsed. "She's not well," my father said. Not an answer. Then came the shift, the part they'd planned. "We raised you," my mother said. "We gave you everything." There it was, the debt they believed I owed. They listed sacrifices, tuition, clothes, time, things parents choose to give, then weaponize when control slips. "You wouldn't be where you are without us," my father said. I nodded. "That's true," I replied, "but I also wouldn't be here without my money." Silence. Sharp. My mother's voice hardened. "You're being ungrateful." Ungrateful, a word designed to end conversations. "No," I said, "I'm being accurate." Then my father leaned forward, lowered his voice. "We spoke to the lawyer," he said. "This could get ugly." Ugly? Threat disguised as concern. He continued, "If this goes to court, family history will be examined, relationships questioned." I waited, because I knew what was coming next. "And you don't want that," my mother added softly. "People might misunderstand your intentions." Misunderstand, as if truth were subjective. I realized something in that moment. They weren't trying to convince me. They were trying to scare me. I asked, "What do you want?" They relaxed slightly, because finally we were being honest. My father slid a folder across the table, a revised proposal, better than the last. Partial reimbursement, non-admission clause, confidentiality. Always confidentiality. "You drop any legal action," he said, "we move on." Move on. From years of deception. I closed the folder without opening it. "I won't sign anything that erases what happened," I said. My mother's eyes filled with tears, but they didn't fall. Controlled again. She whispered, "You're destroying this family." And suddenly I saw it. Not clearly before, but unmistakably now. They believed the family was a structure they owned, and I was a beam holding it up, not a person. I stood. "I'm leaving," I said. My father snapped, "If you walk away, don't come back." There it was, the ultimatum. I paused, turned back, and said something I'd never dared say before. I already left. I walked out, and for the first time, their words didn't follow me. The next morning, everything exploded. My phone lit up, dozens of missed calls, from relatives, from unknown numbers, from people who'd never been involved, suddenly invested. Then my lawyer called. Urgent. "They filed an emergency motion," she said. "For what?" I asked. "To limit your contact with your grandmother." My stomach dropped. "They're claiming you're causing her distress and influencing her decisions." Influencing. Projection. Within hours, the narrative shifted publicly. I wasn't standing up for myself anymore. I was the problem. Social media posts appeared. Vague, passive-aggressive. Sad when money comes between family. Some people forget where they come from. People commented, liked, judged, without knowing a single fact. My grandmother still hadn't called, and that silence now felt intentional, engineered. That evening, my lawyer forwarded me something. A medical note, dated 2 days earlier. My grandmother had been diagnosed with stress-related complications. Real, documented, used. My parents were building a case, not just legally, emotionally, morally. I sat on my couch and stared at the wall, because suddenly the risk was clear. If my grandmother sided with them, even passively, I lost everything. Leverage, credibility, possibility of justice. Then, at 11:47 p.m., my phone buzzed. A message from my grandmother, the first in days. It read, "I need to see you alone tomorrow morning. Don't tell your parents." I didn't breathe for a long time because I knew this meeting would decide everything. I barely slept. At dawn, I drove to her house, the same house, the one I paid for in ways no document acknowledged. She looked fragile, smaller than before, but her eyes were sharp, clear. She asked me to sit. Then she said something that changed the shape of the room. "I've read everything," she said. "All the emails, the proposals, the legal drafts." My chest tightened. "They didn't know I had access," she continued. "I wanted to understand who was telling me the truth." She looked directly at me and asked one question. "If I fix this, will you walk away from them forever?" The question wasn't about money. It was about consequence. I opened my mouth, then stopped, because I realized something horrifying. No matter how I answered, someone would lose a child. "If I fix this, will you walk away from them forever?" My grandmother's question hung between us like a blade, not because it was cruel, but because it was honest. For the first time, someone wasn't asking me to absorb the damage quietly. They were asking me to choose. I didn't answer right away. I looked around the house. The walls I'd painted as a teenager, the staircase I'd fallen down once and laughed about later, the place I'd defended for years without realizing I was defending a lie. This wasn't just property, it was memory, and memory makes people do irrational things. "I don't want to walk away," I said carefully. "I want the truth to exist without being punished for it." She nodded slowly. "That's what I thought you'd say." She reached for a folder on the side table, thicker than any document I'd seen before. "I asked my lawyer for everything," she said. "Not summaries, not explanations, everything." She opened it. Inside were printed emails, drafts, timelines, notes. Some of them I recognized, some I didn't. They started planning years ago, long before the party, long before retirement. My stomach tightened. She pointed to one page, an email from my father, sent almost a decade earlier. "As long as she believes it's the family home, she'll help. She's loyal." Loyal, not loved, useful. My chest burned, not with anger, with clarity so sharp it almost hurt. My grandmother closed the folder. "I raised my son better than this," she said quietly, "or at least I thought I did." Her voice cracked, just once. "I won't live long enough to undo everything," she said, "but I can stop it from continuing." She slid another document toward me. This one was different, official, final, a revised will, already drafted, already signed, pending filing. She had skipped my parents entirely. The house would go into a trust. My name was on it, not alone, but protected, structured, transparent. "They'll contest it," I said. "I know," she replied. "Let them." She looked at me hard. "But this is where I need to know something." She leaned forward. "If I do this, you will become the villain in their story, permanently." I swallowed. "I already am." She nodded. "Then listen carefully." She took my hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "This isn't about punishing them. It's about ending the pattern." I left her house with the weight of inevitability pressing on my chest. By the time I reached my car, my phone was vibrating. Missed calls, texts, voicemails. They knew. By evening, it was official. The filing went through, the trust was registered, notifications were sent, and within an hour, my parents arrived at my apartment. They didn't knock. They pounded. Hard, desperate, angry. When I opened the door, my mother was crying openly now, uncontrolled. My father's face was red, shaking. "She's destroying us, and you let her." Let her, as if I were the manipulator. My father stepped forward. "You think this makes you right?" he shouted. "You think money replaces family?" I didn't raise my voice. "No," I said. I think honesty does. He laughed, a sharp, broken sound. You always thought you were better than us. There it was, the resentment, the thing beneath everything. I thought you trusted me. My mother collapsed into a chair. We did. That's why this hurts. Trust. Again, twisted. My father leaned in close, so close I could smell his cologne. If you don't fix this, he said quietly, we're done. No more pretending, no more softness, just control or exile. I looked at him and finally understood something devastating. This wasn't a threat. It was an offer. Come back into the system or be erased. I won't undo the trust. My mother wailed. My father went still, very still. Then he said the thing that broke whatever hope remained. You were never supposed to know. The room went silent. Even my mother stopped crying, because that sentence said everything. I nodded slowly. Then this was inevitable. They left without another word. Not dramatically, not loudly, just gone. The fallout was immediate. Family lines were drawn, stories rewritten. I was called greedy, cold, manipulative. People I'd grown up with stopped responding. Some blocked me outright. But something else happened too. Quietly, privately. People started messaging me, one by one. I went through something similar. They did that to me too. I wish I'd had your courage. The pattern was bigger than me, and suddenly my story wasn't just mine anymore. A month later, the legal challenge arrived, as expected, aggressive, messy, personal, but weaker than it looked, because truth ages well, lies don't. Then one evening I received a message from my mother, not angry, not threatening, just tired. I don't recognize you anymore. I stared at the screen, then typed my reply. I don't recognize the version of me you needed. I didn't send it. Some truths don't need delivery. Weeks later, I visited my grandmother again. She was weaker now, but peaceful. They hate me, she said softly. No, I replied. They hate losing control. She smiled faintly. Good, she said. It was time someone did. As I left her room, I realized something chilling. The climax wasn't the trust, or the money, or the house. It was the moment they realized I could no longer be controlled by silence, and that was the most expensive thing they'd ever lost. The house is quiet now. Not the heavy silence that hides secrets, a different kind. The kind that comes after truth has done its damage and stayed anyway. My grandmother passed away 3 months later, peacefully. No last-minute confessions, no dramatic reconciliations, just a soft ending to a long life. At the funeral, my parents stood on the opposite side of the room. We didn't speak. We didn't make eye contact. We existed in parallel grief, separate, incompatible. And for the first time, that felt honest. The trust held. They contested it just as promised, but facts don't bend easily. Documents don't cry. Emails don't forget. Timelines don't lie. The case ended quietly. No courtroom drama, just a settlement. The kind that feels like defeat to people who expected control. I didn't win the house. That's the part people get wrong. The trust required it to be sold. Assets divided transparently, everything accounted for. What I received wasn't a building, it was reimbursement, acknowledgement, closure. I moved again, this time into a place chosen without guilt, paid for without explanation, mine, fully. And for the first time in my adult life, I slept without bracing for disappointment. My parents never apologized, not directly, not clearly. They reframed instead, told people things got complicated, that I was strong-willed, that family didn't work out. I let them. Because people who rewrite history are already living with its consequences. What surprised me most was what happened next. Distance didn't hollow me out, it clarified me. I stopped explaining myself, stopped defending boundaries, stopped translating my choices into language that made others comfortable. And slowly, quietly, my life got lighter. I used to think betrayal was loud, explosive, obvious. I was wrong. Betrayal wears familiarity. It sounds like, trust us. It looks like, this is for the family. It survives because it asks you to stay kind while someone else stays dishonest. Here's the part no one tells you. Standing up for yourself doesn't just cost relationships, it reveals which ones were real. I lost people, but I didn't lose myself. And that trade, painful as it was worth everything. I still think about the party sometimes, the laughter, the balloons, the moment my grandmother spoke the truth without realizing it would detonate a decade of lies. That moment saved me, even if it burned everything first. If you're listening to this and something feels familiar, if you've ever felt obligated without understanding why, if money, guilt, and love are tangled in your family in ways no one wants to name, listen carefully. Silence is not peace. Compliance is not loyalty. And love that requires ignorance is not love at all. I used to believe family meant endurance, that you absorb pain quietly because that's what good people do. I don't believe that anymore. Family should not require you to disappear. The hardest lesson wasn't learning they lied, it was learning they expected me to keep lying to myself. If you take anything from my story, let it be this. Ask questions early. Ask them calmly. Ask them anyway. Because the truth doesn't destroy families, it exposes what was already broken. And if standing up for yourself makes you the villain in someone else's story, that story was never written with your humanity in mind. I don't know if my parents will ever understand what they lost, but I do know what I gained. My voice, my clarity, my future. And that house? It was never really about the house. It was about who was allowed to own the truth.